So for the board and the executives at Central Coast Grown, this video will kind of overview some of the things we've talked about in prior meetings and phone calls, just to give you something you can refer back to for the steps for soliciting donations and talking to potential donors and benefactors. Remember the 4 steps of that process: meet and greet, qualify, present the offer, and close the transaction. Meet and greet means that no matter who the person is, how familiar you are with them, if you're friends with them or colleagues, did you start each conversation with a reintroduction of that relationship? So you remember names, you remember context, you check in and touch base with things that you know about that person, maybe how their family is, how their kids are, how their business is doing, other involvements they have, just to create that 30 to 60 second establishment of rapport so that the person remembers that there's some relationship with you other than just you randomly showing up to ask them for money. Once that's complete, you want to get into the interest that that person has of why they might want to be a benefactor or donor or support the organization. It doesn't necessarily need to be asked that way. You might want to start by simply asking what things they might need to help their business, things that are obstacles that they're facing maybe in the community. Maybe they're things that they want to accomplish that they need support and help with doing. You can keep it very general, very vague. The conversation is about them. Having the conversation begin with a subject that relates to the other person serves many purposes. It takes the tone of that conversation down a few levels. It takes the anxiety and the pressure off of you to have to speak to a person, so it doesn't sound like you're there begging, and it makes you feel less awkward about the conversation. More importantly, it demonstrates to that person that the association and yourself both have humility. It's not about what you want to talk about or what you want to present to them. It's more about what their needs are. And you're not presuming that all the great stuff that you have to talk about, especially with regard to the association or Central Coast Grown or City Farm, have to do with anything they're interested in yet. It may be, but you haven't gotten to that point yet. You want to talk about their needs first. And as we mentioned in the board meeting a couple weeks ago, it may be as simple as asking for advice, asking for suggestions about what they think would be good ways to run the association. And again, you don't have to take these recommendations as gospel or handle every single one of them as a good idea, but it gets them to think about what their point of view is, what their perspective is about the association. It doesn't have to be about the association, it can be about them. It can be about what their needs are for their business, for them individually. A question that came up that Jenna asked today was, is it important to find out if their interest in supporting the association have to do with personal or business interests? And absolutely it does. If a person is part of a business and there may be a context there, you want to very clearly define, are they looking to support or donate as an individual or through as part of that business? One of the things that might make a difference is if it's a business, the needs of that business are going to be different than the needs of that individual. There may be advertising, marketing, promotion, public relations that go along with that business, where for an individual, it may be participation, inclusion in events. It may be being aware of upcoming things that are happening in the association. It may even be having some input into those, into steering how the association runs. So identifying if it's an individual or an individual acting on behalf of a company is certainly a very early piece of information to establish, because if it is a company, you want to find out what position that person has in the company. Do they need to check with a board? Do they need to check with a CEO? Do they have the ultimate decision-making authority? Because if they don't, you need to know that as well. So if they do need to move on and ask somebody else for permission or approval on a donation, you can very clearly establish with them first, are you in favor of this? Do you want to go ahead with this? Are you going to recommend to the board, to the CEO, to the general manager, that they do support the association and donate or whatever the case may be? Because if they're not behind it 100%, they certainly can't make a recommendation to the board to take that kind of an action. So finding out where they stand first, and then once you've established that, yeah, I really want to do this, I really want to support this, I'm going to go to my board. Great, so you're on our side, right? Do you need any other information? One of the things that we talked about in a phone call with Jenna and Kevin was offering your input on that conversation. Now, the person may not take you up on it, but if this person in the company is going to go to a board or go to a management staff and ask for permission or authority to donate, you want to offer to be part of that conversation. Look, do you want me to come with you? I can bring information. If you tell me what time that phone call is going to happen or that meeting, I'll wait by the phone in case a question comes up in that meeting that you need my answer to or my input on. It's unlikely that they're going to need that, but it does show that you're taking it seriously. It also serves for you to find out when that conversation is happening, so you'll know when to follow up afterwards. If you don't know when that conversation will happen, it's going to be very difficult to follow up later because it's going to be a shot in the dark. You're going to be guessing. You could call 2 days later. You could call 2 weeks later. 2 days later could be too late. 2 weeks later could be too early. You'll never know. But if you ask them when that meeting's going to happen, you can say, well, look, I'll be waiting by the phone in case you have a question during that meeting. I'll clear my desk. So if you call, I'll be there. It also makes that conversation a high priority for you. So the person who is going to set that meeting will also take it more seriously. They'll make sure that they follow through on that meeting. Who knows if that meeting's a really established date on a calendar or if it's a maybe type of meeting. If you're telling your prospective donor that you're going to be waiting by the phone, they will make that meeting a higher priority. 9 times out of 10, the meeting's going to happen anyways. But remember, it's a numbers game. So that 1 out of 10 extra time that you get more progress is like an instant 10% increase in your donations, in the revenue for the association, which is very important. That extra 10% could make a world of difference in what the association can do. So that's the qualifying stage. You're asking the prospect what their needs are, what their business needs are, what's important to them right now. What things are they thinking about this week? Since the last time you talked to them, things may have changed. So don't just rewind back to your last conversation. Ask them, well, since we last talked, what thoughts have you had? What questions have you had? What things have come up in you that might be worth us talking about? You want to not assume that the last 5 days, 8 days, 2 weeks, however long it's been since your last conversation, things have remained the same. They may have new information. They may have better ideas. They may have worse ideas. But you want to establish that. Don't just fall back to the last word you said, because both you and that prospective donor have lived lives during that time, and many things may have changed. You want to establish that. Once you completely understand what the needs of that prospective donor or supporter might be, then you want to put together a presentation that matches those needs. You don't want to talk about the great things of City Farm or Central Coast Grown or the association based on what you think is great about it. You want to find the things that you feel are going to appeal to that person. They may not be things that the prospective donor specifically called out. That's where you need to use your human insight, get with some other board members, get with Jenna, get with even Kevin for legal or whatever the case may be, and brainstorm about what you're reading between the lines on that last conversation that will be helpful for that client to come across with the maximum donation possible that makes them feel comfortable. Because really, like we talked about, there's energy in this person to begin with. They wouldn't be talking to you and spending their time speaking with you if there wasn't energy. There's already a built-up, pent-up energy and interest in doing something. They may not know what it is. They may need help and direction figuring out exactly what that's going to look like, but that's where your job comes in. You want to take that energy and boost it up as much as you can and then direct it in one particular focus. Otherwise, if you ask them, well, how do you want to participate? How do you want to contribute? They're going to be, I don't know. They're looking for you for that kind of guidance. So making sure that qualifying stage is the longest stage of all of them. In fact, the qualifying stage, step 2, should probably take as much time as the other 3 put together. The meet and greet, the presenting of the offering, and the closing of the transaction altogether shouldn't take as much time as the qualifying stage. So spend a lot of time really establishing good intel and deep roots of that person's needs before you go anywhere else. So that's step 2. Once you've exhausted all your resources on that, take a time out, regroup, think of what the offering is, and then come back at another conversation, whether it's by phone, preferably in person, with a really good offering, even if it's one of your tiered items for contribution, so that the person's reception of that idea matches what they told you. And you can even refer back to, I remember hearing you say, Mr. Or Mrs. prospective donor, that you think it would be a good idea for us to paint the sign green. Well, that might be something that would be a good idea. So we would recommend that you contribute at this certain level. We could use those funds for ideas like that. May not have to promise exactly what their idea was, but at least you're suggesting that it matches the same level of that type of activity. Always offer at least 2 or maybe 2.5 potential offerings, donation levels. And how do you do a half of an offering? Well, you have one that kind of matches what you think their budget might be, one that's much higher, and then one that's a little bit of an add-on to either one. Well, you could donate this much, but for a little bit more, we'll also do this. So having a little bit of an add-on so that if you're close to the budget, you can fine-tune it with a little bit of add-on one way or another. Once you presented that, again, you want to establish whether or not that's a good idea, what the customer's reaction is. How does that sound to you? And when you ask the question, you want to do exactly that. You want to stop. You want to put a pause in the conversation to make sure you get a very good response. It can be open-ended, but a very clear response, positive or negative. How does that sound to you? Does that sound like what you're looking for? Period, with a pause at the end of it to get their response at that point. It's very tempting to try to break into that silence if the person doesn't respond right away because it's awkward. You want to get that response, because if you keep talking, you're not getting, it's not a two-way conversation. Now it's becoming a monologue, kind of like this video is a monologue. You don't want your presentation to that person to become a monologue. You want it to be a two-way street. So now, once you've qualified, you got information, you're presenting the offering, you're giving information, now you want to stop and get more feedback again on what that offering sounds like to them. You might have to fine-tune it. Once you get some positive feedback, you may get objections. Well, it sounds good except for this. It sounds good, maybe that, or I'm not sure about this. You want to isolate those objections. What are the things that are holding up that potential contributor, that potential supporter? And I isolate those. Well, other than this one thing, other than the fact that you don't want to paint the signs green, is there anything else that's holding you up? Other than the fact that you're not sure if your board is going to approve it, is there anything else that's holding you up? No? Okay, good. So other than this, and then repeat that back to them. Other than this one thing or these two things, there's nothing else that would keep you from going ahead with this, correct? Great. If there is, you want to find that out. You don't want to hide objections. You don't want to pretend they don't exist. If there are problems or objections to your offering, you want to make sure and you flush those out and smoke those out now so you can deal with them, so they're not kind of the elephant in the room that nobody knows about. You want to know about them so you can deal with them. Then you deal with them one by one, and once you get to the very end, you want to ask the question for action with the expectation that they're going to go ahead with taking that step, taking that action of donating, supporting, whatever the step you're asking for is, right then. And you want to make it a very clear delineation. We're doing this or we're not. Not thinking about it, probably will, I'll get back to you. Other than here's my check, every other answer is no for the moment. Other than here's my money, every other answer is no. And if it's a no, you want to know that. Close the sale, make sure you get good info, make sure you get the final yes or no. If you don't get a transaction, you want to make sure that you're understanding that it's letting the customer down and you down.